In the heart of the Indian Ocean, a 17-square-mile atoll has become China's greatest strategic fear, not for its nukes, but for its real power to choke off 83% of Chinese oil imports without firing a single nuclear warhead. Diego Garcia's runways and hidden arsenals make it the ultimate economic lever in modern warfare, a place where colonial scars and 21st-century strategy collide. But before the world learned to fear what Diego Garcia could do, thousands paid the price for what it would become. Why did a stolen paradise transform into the West's secret dagger at China's throat? The story begins with exile. In London, 1966, a handful of British officials gathered behind closed doors to redraw the map of the Indian Ocean. On paper, the Chagos archipelago vanished from Mauritius, severed by a stroke of an administrative pen. The decision was not driven by local needs or the wishes of the islanders, but by the demands of Cold War strategy. British cabinet papers from the era reveal negotiations with Washington focused on securing an outpost far from prying eyes, a place where the United States could build a base without interference. The arrangement required a new legal fiction, the British Indian Ocean Territory, created solely to enable a lease. For the people who called Diego Garcia home, there was no seat at the table. Instead, their fate was decided in diplomatic cables and secret memos. The official line spoke of development and security, but internal documents show a calculated move to clear the islands of any population that might complicate military plans. The detachment of Chagos from Mauritius, finalized in November 1965 and formalized with a lease in December 1966, set the stage for what would follow. The islands were now a blank slate in the eyes of London and Washington, a remote asset to be traded for strategic advantage. For the Chagosians, the implications were immediate but unspoken. The machinery of empire had shifted, and their home was no longer theirs to claim. In the years that followed the administrative detachment of the Chagos archipelago, the islanders' lives unraveled with cold efficiency. Beginning in 1968, families were summoned with little warning, told their homes would soon be off limits. British officials, acting under orders, arranged for the forced removal of nearly 2,000 men, women, and children. Livestock was slaughtered, homes were abandoned, and entire communities were loaded onto ships bound for Mauritius and the Seychelles. Many arrived with nothing but what they could carry, left to navigate unfamiliar streets and crowded refugee camps. Olivier Bancu, just a child at the time, later recalled the confusion and grief of watching his family forced from the only home they had ever known. His mother, like many others, struggled to find work or shelter in exile. The Chagos Refugees Group, founded decades later, would channel these memories into a campaign for justice. Meanwhile, the first U.S. Navy personnel landed on Diego Garcia in 1971, setting up tents and radio masts where island children once played. By the mid-1980s, the base population had swelled to more than double the number of original inhabitants, thousands of military staff and contractors occupying a place now closed to its own people. In 2019, the International Court of Justice condemned the expulsions as unlawful, but the ruling changed little on the ground. The legacy of forced removal continues to shape every debate over Diego Garcia's future, casting a long shadow over the strategic value that would soon make the island famous for reasons far beyond its shores. Across Diego Garcia's narrow tongue of land, 2 runways stretch for 12,000 feet each, long enough to handle anything in the American arsenal, from lumbering B-52s to sleek B-2. Spirit stealth bombers loaded for intercontinental strike. The runways run parallel, separated by a strip of tarmac and scrub designed for simultaneous operations and quick turnarounds. On humid days, the air shimmers above the concrete, but the real secret lies just beyond the heat haze. 4 massive hangars, each climate-controlled to laboratory standards, house the most sensitive aircraft in the fleet. The B-2 Spirit, with its radar-absorbing skin, cannot survive the tropical damp without constant care. Inside these hangars, technicians monitor temperature and humidity around the clock, preserving the bomber's stealth edge for missions that could stretch halfway across the globe. Satellite images tell the story in silent detail. Maxar's 2024 pass captured the outline of a B-2, its wings tucked under the curved roof of Hangar 2. The date stamp, March 18, 2024, matches Air Force rotation logs. For several weeks that spring, 1/3 of America's B-2 fleet rotated through Diego Garcia, conducting training runs and long-range navigation exercises. The pattern repeats in the data. In 2023, B-52s lined up wingtip to wingtip after a refueling surge, their presence confirmed by both satellite and open-source flight tracking. Every arrival and departure is a signal, sometimes to allies, sometimes to rivals watching from thousands of miles away. The base's isolation is its armor. There are no civilian flights, no commercial distractions. Every movement is logged, every landing rehearsed. Crews cycle through in tight rotations, flying missions that can last up to 44 hours round trip with mid-air refueling. Analysts like Jeffrey Lewis pore over commercial satellite imagery, matching tail numbers to hangar doors, charting the rhythm of deployments. The evidence leaves no doubt. Diego Garcia is not a relic of Cold War planning, but a living, breathing node in America's global air power network. Its runways and hangars are the backbone of a strategy built on reach, readiness, and the ability to strike from the middle of nowhere. Fuel lines snake beneath the coral sands, feeding a network of storage tanks that rivals those of major seaports. Diego Garcia's fuel reserves, measured in the hundreds of millions of gallons, are the silent force behind every sortie and convoy. This island functions as the Indian Ocean's main refueling hub, supporting bombers, tankers, and warships as they cross half the globe. In the lagoon, maritime prepositioning ships remain on constant standby, loaded with the vehicles, ammunition, and supplies needed to keep a Marine Expeditionary Brigade in the field for a full month without outside help. Their hulls carry everything from M1 Abrams tanks to field hospitals, ready for rapid offload if conflict erupts. Rear Admiral Michael McDevitt, a veteran of Indo-Pacific logistics planning, describes Diego Garcia as the last reliable link in America's global supply chain. He points to the base's ability to surge fuel and material into the theater, bypassing choke points that might be mined or blockaded in wartime. During the opening weeks of Operation Enduring Freedom, prepositioned stocks from Diego Garcia saved 40 days of shipping time and over $100 million in transport costs. The lesson was clear. Endurance wins campaigns, and endurance depends on logistics. Communications infrastructure is just as critical. Diego Garcia houses satellite ground stations and secure fiber links that tie it directly to Washington, Hawaii, and command centers across the world. Space Force antennas track satellites and monitor missile launches, while deep-sea cables ensure that orders and intelligence flow without interruption. From this remote atoll, commanders can coordinate bomber strikes, naval patrols, and humanitarian missions with the same precision as if they were sitting in the Pentagon. Every element of the base is designed for sustained, independent operation. Fuel farms, ammunition bunkers, and water purification plants form a self-contained ecosystem, able to function for weeks if cut off. This is what sets Diego Garcia apart. It is not just a launch pad, it is a fortress of logistics, engineered to outlast any blockade and keep the pressure on adversaries long after other bases have gone dark. Oil tankers bound for China trace a narrow path across the Indian Ocean, threading through a maritime corridor just 1.7 miles wide at its tightest point, the Strait of Malacca. Each year, nearly $3 trillion worth of trade squeezes through this bottleneck, carrying everything from electronics and machinery to the fuel that keeps China's cities lit and its factories running. The numbers behind this dependency are stark. 83% of China's imported oil flows through Malacca, a figure that keeps planners in Beijing up at night. 2/3 of all Chinese trade, by volume and by value, relies on ships passing through these waters. The route is not just important, it is essential to the survival of the Chinese economy. Diego Garcia sits roughly 2,500 miles west of the strait, and just 1,900 miles from Pakistan's Gwadar port, the endpoint of China's overland energy corridor. Diego Garcia's position allows American bombers and naval aircraft to reach every tanker and container ship heading to China from the Middle East or Africa, all without ever approaching the Chinese coastline. There is no alternate route that can bypass these waters at scale. Even the much-hyped Belt and Road corridors, like pipelines across Myanmar or highways from Gwadar, still depend on sea lanes that Diego Garcia can threaten. Chinese military analysts have described this exposure as the Malacca dilemma. In open-source PLA Navy publications, Diego Garcia is named as a critical threat node, a place that could, in a conflict, be used to sever China's economic lifeline without a single missile crossing into Chinese territory. The fear is not just theoretical. War games and scenario planning exercises in Beijing routinely model what would happen if the Indian Ocean shipping lanes were closed. The results are always the same. Oil reserves would run dry in weeks, factories would slow, and the country's export engine would sputter to a halt. For a government whose legitimacy depends on economic growth, that kind of disruption is far more dangerous than the threat of a distant nuclear exchange. The geometry of the straits offers no comfort. At its narrowest, Malacca is so tight that a single disabled ship or a handful of mines could halt traffic for days. Diego Garcia's air and naval assets can operate far from Chinese anti-access weapons, enforcing a distant blockade that is difficult to break. The base's location, almost equidistant from Bab el-Mandeb and Malacca, means it can threaten shipping no matter which alternate route is tried. Even the energy corridor through Pakistan, ending at Gwadar, lies within easy reach of aircraft and cruise missiles launched from Diego Garcia. Inside Chinese ministries, import planners and military strategists have tried to map out solutions. They have commissioned new pipelines, invested in foreign ports, and signed long-term contracts for overland energy. Yet the numbers refuse to budge. As of 2024, more than 4/5 of China's oil imports still arrive by sea, and nearly all of that passes within striking distance of Diego Garcia. The island's power is not in its size, but in its ability to threaten the arteries of a global economy. For Beijing, this is the nightmare scenario. A remote atoll, armed and ready with the capacity to strangle China's future without ever firing a nuclear weapon. Construction crews worked through the monsoon season in 2023, pouring new concrete across Diego Garcia's main runways. The resurfacing effort was not just routine maintenance. According to U.S. Navy logs, the upgrades included reinforced taxiways for heavier loads, expanded munitions bunkers, and new blast walls around the fuel farms. By the end of 2024, the base's operational tempo had climbed to its highest level in a decade. Each improvement sent a clear message. Diego Garcia was being hardened for the long haul. Diplomats in London and Port Louis were hammering out the final language of a treaty that would define the island's future for generations. The deal, signed in May 2025, transferred legal sovereignty of the Chagos archipelago to Mauritius, but carved out a 99-year lease for the UK and the United States. The lease guarantees exclusive control over Diego Garcia's airfield, port, and communications, locking in military access until at least the 22nd century. British officials described it as the most robust legal safeguard the base had ever known. Classified annexes outlined protocols for intelligence, movement of personnel, and the handling of prepositioned weapons. Mauritius received financial compensation and limited resettlement rights elsewhere in the archipelago, but Diego Garcia itself remained off-limits to all but allied military staff. The ink was barely dry when Beijing issued a formal protest. China's foreign ministry called the arrangement a relic of colonialism, warning that it entrenched military threats in the Indian Ocean. The statement landed as B-2 bombers taxied for another round of training sorties. For Chinese planners, the lease was a worst-case outcome, a hostile outpost now legally untouchable, sitting astride their economic lifeline. Energy economists ran new simulations in Washington and Singapore, modeling the effects of a distant blockade enforced from Diego Garcia. The numbers were unforgiving. If American bombers and naval patrols began intercepting tankers south of Malacca, China's oil reserves would last no more than 3 months. Industrial output would falter within weeks. By the 4th month, rolling blackouts would ripple across coastal cities. Food imports would slow, factories would close, and unemployment would surge. The central government's ability to manage unrest would erode with every cargo that failed to arrive. Unlike a nuclear exchange, which guarantees mutual ruin, a blockade executed from Diego Garcia offers a slow, surgical squeeze, devastating to China's economy, but leaving American and European cities untouched. Strategists from both sides study these scenarios with grim focus. The 99-year lease means Diego Garcia is locked into the United States arsenal for the foreseeable future, immune to the political winds in Mauritius or the United Nations. The base's new infrastructure, its legal permanence, and the economic models of collapse all point to the same conclusion. The island is not just a relic of empire, but a living instrument of coercion. For Beijing, it is a problem with no easy solution, a fortress that can throttle the world's second-largest economy without ever crossing the nuclear threshold. In a world defined by supply chains, not just missiles, Diego Garcia's shadow stretches far beyond its shores. As China expands its global reach, this remote atoll quietly holds the power to reshape economies in days, not decades. The real balance of power now depends on who controls the world's choke points, not who owns the most warheads. What would you risk to keep your lifeline open?